you so very much for checking out the Sportsline Podcast here on our CHCH and Parrot Media platform. I'm Bubba O'Neill. As always, I'm so proud to brag the Golden Horseshoe is a hotbed for winning teams, athletes, executives, as well as events. Folks, what a week it's been. When the Canadian Football League revealed that a major announcement would be made in 24 hours regarding significant changes to the game, speculation ran wild. Even the insiders normally in the know were locked out. With a primary focus on enhancing the entertainment of the game, here is the future of the CFL. A 2-year phase of 3 rule changes and enhancements will be introduced in 2026 and 2027, and these changes have been unanimously passed by the Board of Governors. At the press conference, Commissioner Stuart Johnson was asked, after only 151 days on the job, how did he get to the point that he knew changes were needed?
I came to this job with a message to the league governors, and they gave me the same message back. Status quo is unacceptable. So I came in with a lot of energy, and I've got an incredible team at the league office. I did a listening tour over the first 100 days, and we gathered a very small group at the league office that included football ops, marketing, data analytics, and we pushed forward these changes. We analyzed them, we understood, and every step of the way, we became more excited.
The crew at 3DownNation.com have covered this week's announcement like none other. Not only were they at the presser, they had an exclusive sit-down with the commissioner. They gathered reaction from players and executives and even spoke to U Sports on how Canadian University, that football league, how they plan to react. Justin Dunk, job well done, and thank you for taking time with us on the Sportsline Podcast to break this all down. It's been quite a week.
Thanks for having me on, dude.
Let's start off with this. First off, let's listen to some of the CFL's well-known names for their thoughts and opinions on some of those rules that we have just seen.
The worst part I think about it, honestly, is the fact that the people who play football, who have the football knowledge, were not consulted about this.
I think everybody understands where I would stand. I'll say it. If we're going to be altering the game and removing uniquely Canadian items from the game, I would never be in favor of that.
This is about trying to create an entertainment factor that can add a dollar, right? That can make sure that 7 out of 9 teams aren't losing money, right? I've been in this league a long time, and I think I'm, knowledgeable enough to say that I understand the nuances of this game, and it's tough for teams to make money right now. And in order for them to do that, they got to find ways to make that happen, right? And if this is a step in that direction, then so be it.
We have a commissioner who hasn't been here for a year, who's already trying to change the game, and I don't believe he loves football as much as I do, as much as many fans do, as much as people who grew up loving this game. I don't think you cannot make adjustments like this and tell me that you like football, or you love the Canadian football game, because you're changing it. And what we're moving towards is not Canadian football.
Such a wide range of opinions, Justin, but Nathan Rourke's reaction clearly the strongest. He kind of went on for about 6 minutes on the topic. I mean, your thoughts on, I guess your original thoughts, and of course what the players have been saying.
So initially, when I found out about these changes, and I don't think the insiders were quite locked out, because I knew more than 24 hours in advance what was going to go down, and there were rumblings for weeks before that. So I just want to get that out of the way off the top, that my initial first blush was like, well, significant changes to the game. I don't necessarily think these are significant in terms of what they could have been, because the talk about 4 downs was so much out there and has been out there, my man, as you know, going back to the pandemic and the rumors about potentially merging with the XFL, or actually the somewhat public discussions that took place there. So from my standpoint, I understand sports leagues need to adapt and evolve. And a lot of people out there are comparing these changes that the CFL has made to the pitch clock in Major League Baseball. That is not a direct line. We cannot be comparing that, okay? Major League Baseball games were going on way too long. 3.5, 4.5 hours, sometimes even longer in the playoffs. The pitch clock revolutionize the game, because now, by and large part, as you know, Bubba, the games in Major League Baseball are like 2.5, 3 hours, which is great for everybody. The CFL didn't have an issue with its games going too long or not being entertaining enough. Nathan Rourke added to his comments there by saying scoring is up. It's already difficult enough for defenders, in his opinion, and he's a franchise quarterback, the highest paid player in the Canadian Football League at over $600,000 per season, is standing there saying it's already difficult enough for defenses to try to defend me and my offense. So I get the thought process in terms of revolutionizing the game. But let's drill down on something that Bo Levi Mitchell talked about somewhat openly, and that seems to be okay among the Board of Governors, that there's this thought out there that 7 of 9 teams are losing money. These are multi-millionaire, if not even more wealthy owners in the Canadian Football League. People that have done great things in business across our country and outside our borders as well. If they were losing millions upon millions of dollars on their CFL teams, why would they continue to own them? So to me, that is the main part that I want to focus on with you. The issue with the Canadian Football League is not the players, who are better than they've ever been, and scoring is up again for, I believe, a 3rd or 4th straight season in the Canadian Football League. The football operations cap has capped young and up-and-coming minds, at least the number of those young and up-and-coming minds that can get into the Canadian Football League. So the issue with growth is revenue and marketing. It's simple. So if these changes, among a series of announcements that Stuart Johnston is teasing, lead to revenue, then I will understand the tweaks. But in the interim, as you well know, Bubba, we talked about it off air, the Box J Boys, for example, in Hamilton, are threatening to cancel their season's tickets. And you see that on social media. Now, that's not always the best representation of our society. You know, I think especially in Canada, people are much nicer, definitely in person. But when you have people talking about this, that impacts the bottom line. I understand there has to be an evolution. But to me, the issue with the Canadian Football League is revenue and marketing. So that's where I try to focus on with these changes. If this leads to American expansion, big expansion fees, perhaps a bigger TV deal in the United States, perhaps a bigger TV deal in Canada, then I will understand. And I will give Stuart Johnston the benefit of the doubt. But honestly, the more that I think about it, I think that the CFL and Board of Governors are going about this potentially in a backwards way, because you have a businessman, by and large part, in Stuart Johnston, who was brought in to be the commissioner. And I think the business of the CFL is what has to be under the microscope, not the football game. And I think that's why Nathan Rourke is so upset. And I understand him wanting to be consulted. There's other opinions out there that, well, would a CEO consult his employees before making a major decision with the business? Probably not. So I can understand his frustration. I don't think the changes are, from my standpoint, as catastrophic as I thought that they might be. But to me, this needs to lead to revenue. Otherwise, what are we doing here?
You're the perfect person to discuss this, because I know that not only do you do what you do at 3Down Nation, you have a sensitivity to the game as a guy that came up through the ranks in high school, Guelph University, being one of the top dogs there of all time as a quarterback, and then touching in with some the professional game as well. I just want to go through a couple of the rule changes here. Let's get a couple of words from you on each one. Starting in 2026, the Rouge will be modified as a single point and no longer will be awarded for missed field goals or punts that sailed through the end zone. Your thoughts?
I like it. I think it makes sense. It takes away the failure point that seems to go viral on the few occasions that it does happen. So Stuart Johnston and his explanation for this Rouge amendment made a lot of sense to me. He wants it to be an active football play. If the returner decides to take a knee in the end zone and play the field position game, then the other team gets a point. Or if a punt or field goal, well, I shouldn't say field goal, I guess, because the end zones are going to be different in 2027, but for 2026, if there's a field goal that's missed, a punt goes into the end zone, a kickoff, the other team actually has to go down and tackle the returner in there if they're looking for that point. So I like this rule.
The former 20-second play clock will be 35 seconds, but will start when the previous play ends instead of when the official collects and resets the ball. I think that's the meaning of it. I feel like there's some other opinions I'm hearing about this, about that particular change in the game. Have I got it right there?
This seems to be something that Stuart Johnston needs to set in stone with the rules committee, because I think what you're alluding to is a little bit of confusion around the rule, and especially how it could affect arguably the best 3 minutes in sports, which is the final 3 minutes of a Canadian Football League game. So the idea that Johnston explained to me was that he would stay in the command center and he would watch games and he would get out his stopwatch, and oftentimes there would be 10, 15, 20, 25 seconds that would elapse before the 20-second play clock that we all love was actually started, before the ball was spotted and the play was blown in. You know, I've been a part of that going back to my university playing days, that there's some sort of extra time that you can have there to get your play call in or run over to the sideline quickly if you really needed to. So by the letter of what Stuart Johnston said, this new 35-second play clock is supposed to start literally the second that the previous play ended. But if you can have that 35-second runoff within the last 3 minutes, especially of a game, that's not what you want, because it's so exciting and the league likes to use the hashtag no lead is safe. So I think that needs to be looked at. And then if you're having 35 seconds potentially being run off between plays in the entire football game, that's going to lead to less offensive plays. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea here is to have scoring go up. So I think that's one that I like the thought process behind it, but it seems like they need to go through some steps here to really iron it out.
Bench locations, and I think this affects the teams in the East Division more so than the West. They've changed, and they're going to be on opposite sides of the field as opposed to how we enjoyed here in Hamilton, where the Argos are on one side and the Ticats are on one side. I'm actually surprised this has gone on this long.
It makes sense in theory, but here's where we get into the revenue discussion, right? Because as you well know, Bubba, in Hamilton, there's, let's call them the ribbon boards that go the whole length of the field on the other side at Hamilton Stadium that drive, I would imagine, some pretty good revenue for the Tiger Cats because they're shown on national TV consistently for the entire game. So I get it. You don't necessarily want to have a situation where Ryan Dinwiddie is kicking field goals in people's faces, or you know what I mean, like getting excited and there's potentially no benches coming together. But man, like that was awesome. So anyways, from a professional standpoint, I get it. This is how the NFL does things. It makes a lot of sense, but I'm curious how the teams feel that they can make up for some of that lost revenue.
2026 is a bit of a teaser, but it's 2027 where things get heavy. Goalposts will be moving from the goal line to the back of the end zone, which they believe will increase the vision for quarterbacks, players, receivers, DBs, and quarterbacks who have been hitting posts for years will most likely be tossing more touchdown passes. Do you believe this to be true?
You would think so, and the CFL provided me with some data that admittedly was collected just from the start of this season through Labor Day to sort of make this point, I suppose, a little bit more compelling. But I think we need to see this in action. So the data that the CFL gathered in terms of passing the football into the end zone with the upright there. Okay, I hope everybody can stay with me on this one. 0 to 10 yards deep in the end zone to the left. Again, this is from the start of this season through Labor Day. There were 46 passes attempted, 23 completions. 0 to 10 yards deep in the end zone on the right, 45 passes attempted, 27 completions. So we're right around that 50% mark left and right. Down the middle, 19 attempts, so less than half the amount of attempts down the middle, 0 to 10 yards deep in the end zone, and just 6 completions. So we're obviously well under 50% completion rate. You go to 10 to 15 yards in the end zone, down the middle, 3 for 10 on the left, 8 of 13 on the right, 5 for 12. Then you get 15 to 20, and it actually evens out down the middle, 15 to 20 yards deep in the end zone. 10 of 12 passes were completed there. So you're at a great completion rate down the middle, 15 to 20 yards deep. On the right, it was only 5 for 9. On the left, it was 8 of 12. So I would have liked to have seen the CFL collect more data, because I think that would have made sense to fans if you're like, okay, well, we have literally years of data, which, oh, by the way, one of their partners, Pro Football Focus, actually has. So if you're talking about middle of the field, end zone target rate, okay, in the CFL since 2022, and these stats are courtesy Pro Football Focus, it's 29.8%. The NFL is less than that.
Wow.
26% without the uprights in the middle of the end zone. So I think more data would have helped sell some of these major changes that you're alluding to in 2027. I get it from a player safety standpoint, because even if not a lot of players have run into the post, I know from my playing days and then, talking to guys in the pros that if you're running a pattern in that direction, perhaps you're trying to use the goalpost to your advantage, but as a defensive back, you got to be worried about not smacking into it. Like Junior Murtaugh back in the day with the Rough Riders, bless his soul, had a run in with the goalpost. So yeah. I get it from that standpoint. But when you move the goalposts, and I'm sure this is what you're leading into, my man, now you're taking away the majority of missed field goal returns. We see them rarely in the NFL on short field goals. I don't know if a lot of people know that rule, that you can actually return it in the NFL if it's short. So that will be the same thing in the CFL, but you're taking out arguably one of the most exciting plays in the game. And to Nathan Rourke's point, there are players who have made a living in this league returning different types of kicks. Now, there's not a lot of those missed field goal returns that you could say go for touchdowns, but it's still arguably one of the most exciting and electric plays in all of sports.
The field, and this is the thing that has always been so uniquely Canadian to me. It will be reduced from 110 yards to 100 yards. This is strange to me. I'm trying to picture looking at a Canadian Football League field in 2027 and not seeing the 55-yard line.
And the C, that sometimes accompanies it, which Mike Miller, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers special teams coordinator, said to him means Canadian. And I think I would feel the same way. I understand the theory behind this one. I thought this one was pretty well explained, because if you're going to move the field goal post to the back of a 15-yard end zone, you want to take out sort of this middle 10 yards in the field, so you're not having even more distance to go to potentially score points. But this is where the football people that I talk to around the league are like, hey, can we at least have had a conversation about this from a game planning perspective? Because let's say, it's 3rd and 3, for example, from the 30-yard line. That's not a 37-yard field goal anymore. That's a 52-yard field goal. And how often are we actually going to see teams go for it in this hypothetical scenario, 3rd and 3, in that situation? Like, I personally think that the CFL could have tested out some of these changes like we've seen in the NFL, or like the XFL has pseudo done for the NFL in the preseason. There's a chance, Bubba, in talking to some people around the league, and these are longtime coaches and personnel men, that they believe this could actually lead to more punts, which is what the CFL is trying to get rid of. I get it. They're projecting, and I stress projecting, 60 more touchdowns because of the removal of the uprights and then taking out this middle 10 yards in the football field. But we won't actually know what the hard data is until this is put into play.
In addition, end zones have been shortened from 20 yards to 15 yards, which will, I guess, kind of unify the entire league. As we do know, in Toronto, it's 18 yards aside. Montreal, it's kind of cut off at the corners. There are some people, say like in baseball, that like the individual fields and it's the different dimensions. This completely wipes that out for the Canadian Football League. They will all be 15 yards. Your thoughts there?
It does wipe it out, but to Nathan Rourke's point, like if you're playing in Montreal, it's two teams playing on the same field. In Toronto, I do believe there's a player safety aspect to it because the majority of the field is grass, which you need different cleats to play on versus the field turf. And then there's a bit of field turf there to make up the extra little bit because it's actually longer than when it's in its soccer configuration for Toronto FC. So this one, I somewhat understand, but this leads me to that jumping off point in talking to some smart people around the league to think, okay, well, if you look at the dimensions, what they could be or are said to be in 2027, does this lead to a Canadian football field? And I know some people don't feel that it's going to be that way in 2027, fitting into more American stadiums. So I get the uniformity. It's easy to point to some of these as examples, but what we're also going to have to do is look at the youth sports schools that are affected. Like there are multiple youth sports schools around the country that share facilities, or however you want to say it, are allowed to play in CFL facilities, namely at Montreal, like you mentioned.
Yep.
In Winnipeg,
Calgary.
the Bisons and the Bombers.
Yep.
Calgary, in Regina, the Rams and the Riders. So that's where I'm getting at with having this open discussion. I don't think it would have been a bad thing. I'm not saying you have to take everybody's opinions into account, but on the other side, it just shows that the CFL is going to do what they're going to do. And I don't think they necessarily care about grassroots because they're showing you with their actions, regardless of what comes out of their mouths.
I think the biggest reaction, Justin, that I have seen online, people I have spoken to, people that are close to the Canadian game and want to keep it as its unique Canadian CFL game. And I think there's also an element of, hey, let's just see it, but let's just see it play out as well too. But what I keep hearing are these two things: fear of the 4-down game and the Americanization of the Canadian Football League. Is this a fair opinion?
I think it's fair to wonder if that's a possibility in the longer term future, because if these field changes actually do go through as announced in 2027, you're starting to look more like an American field. They can talk about it still being a Canadian game all they want, but it looks way more like an American field than it did prior to the changes. So I asked the commissioner directly, and I felt like the question needed to be asked when probably the most amount of people were watching on the live stream, wherever it was going out. Can you guarantee that the league under your watch will not go to 4 downs? And he said he cannot guarantee it. Now, I followed up and asked him about it afterwards, and he said essentially it's not something that's on his mind. He has subsequently also added that it's not even taking up 1% of his brain power. It doesn't seem like 4 downs was on the table, but we know that 4 downs has been on the table in some form or fashion among the Board of Governors in the past. We know that the Calgary Stampeders and the Toronto Argonauts, as by our reporting at 3DownNation.com, voted in favor of at least exploring 4 down. So it's not like this is anything that is new, and I think that's why fans are concerned. So it seems like, at least in the moment, that if you're going to believe Stuart Johnston in his words, because really nobody else from the Board of Governors has spoken. There's a couple presidents and stuff out there, but the people on the board are staying quiet despite interview requests. So I think I can understand why fans are viewing it that way, that, hey, is this just to get us used to these changes and then you stack more on top of it?
I think in interviews with yourself, interviews with like the likes of like David Naylor, even in the press conference, the commissioner said more than once that more announcements are coming. should we beware here, or are these just much smaller, like TV contracts? Like what do you forecast here?
I think the announcements that he's referring to are about the business of football. It seems like, and I stress seems like, because I'm trying to take the commissioner at his word, that they're done with major changes to the game. So I would think the upcoming announcements that we could expect would be things like the Grey Cup halftime show for Winnipeg in November. Things like where the Grey Cup is going to be played in 2027, because that has not been announced yet. We know where it is in 2026, but the usual timeline under former Commissioner Randy Ambrosie would have had the league already had that announcement out. Now, I know that Stuart Johnston is new and there's a process to go through there, a bid process. So those are the types of announcements I would expect. And then, Brett Lawther, who is the first vice president in the Canadian Football League Players Association and longtime kicker for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, wondered if there was perhaps a big TV deal in the league's pocket here in terms of making these changes. So that's him just wondering aloud, but he's a pretty sharp guy. So based on what Stuart Johnston has told me, I think these announcements that are coming up have to do with the business of the game. I think that's really his next focus. Again, if he is to be believed, I think these major changes to the game that we all care about and love are largely done with, at least in this short-term period. Long-term, to be determined.
At 3Down Nation, you cover all football, including the National Football League, U Sports. There's stuff that's going on down south on a college basis. But I do know at your very heart, your very primary heart, that the Canadian game is something that you are very passionate about. And you've been wonderful in breaking down a lot of stuff here, Justin. But I got to ask you, honestly, have these changes, and I know it's 6 changes, but the game will look and feel and perhaps be different than in a matter of 2 years from now. Do you think this is a positive?
I think it has the chance to be. Like I said, if it leads to increased revenue. I would have liked some of these changes, the major ones especially, that are set to go forth in 2027, to have been tested out. Perhaps even in U Sports exhibition games, right? If you want more data points, perhaps even in Canadian Junior Football League exhibition games, because there have been a bunch of pro players in that league's history that have come a different route to the Canadian Football League. So the issue for U Sports, and I talked to CEO Pierre Arsenault one-on-one. You can find the podcast on 3downnation.com, our YouTube channel, if you want to check it out, about when were you given the heads up about this? Well, it was Monday morning, mere hours before the announcement. Same for Football Canada. So this is where I go to, a lot of my life, my man. I think actions speak louder than words. So I understand the CFL is a business and they're going to worry about them first. But when you talk about caring about grassroots, and then the U Sports CEO, who is the CEO of your single biggest provider of Canadian talent, is finding out hours before the announcement, that shows how much you care about U Sports. And what Pierre Arsenault said to me was, from an infrastructure standpoint, this is going to be a major undertaking for their 27 football playing schools, because those schools are at various stages in terms of new fields. Some of them might be coming up to the point where they need a new turf field, but he said those fields usually last, 10 to 15, maybe on the high end, 20 years. And some of these schools don't just have $1 million laying around to put in a new field, let alone change some of the dimensions. Like, Bubba, as you know, there are multiple fields in U Sports that have tracks around them, for example.
Yes.
That means you got to rip the entire thing up potentially to get this figured out, depending on some of the dimensions, or at least you have to change it. So it is going to cost money. And this is where I go back to, I'm not saying you have to take everybody's opinion into account, But if there was some dialogue with the Football Canada, with U Sports, with the different high school organizations out there across the country to say, hey, like, if we do this, do you guys think that you could potentially follow suit? Because it's going to benefit everyone. You want Canadians playing at a high level in the CFL? Well, you certainly want them playing a similar game at the university level, probably at the high school level, right? Like, don't we want kids playing what is the true CFL game, at least to develop the love for it? So, again, I understand the need to revolutionize or evolve. I get that. Evolve or die in anything, right? Just ask Jim Balsillie and BlackBerry. But I think this is a little bit different than the tech sector when you have all these different levels involved. And if you truly care, and I'm not saying the league doesn't necessarily not care at all, because I think there are already some conversations based on what I've heard ongoing between the sort of co-tenants or the teams that share buildings or use the facilities in CFL markets across the country. But these are some of the ramifications that I think you could have gone through. And if it leaked out, like, you know, who really cares? You're going to get some fan reaction. They've done this publicly before in terms of public sort of open negotiations with the XFL. Like, we all used to be monitoring The Rock's Twitter account and social media. So with something as major as this to some people out there, why not have all these discussions with the stakeholders?
Yeah, I'm surprised. It has been years, and I've been, you know my age, and I've been following the Canadian Football League for multiple decades, and never have I seen an announcement made, and then in 24 hours, the amount of speculation, fear-mongering, happiness, like, just, it was incredible on that day. And I mean, and then they chose a day to have the press conference when the Blue Jays weren't playing. Hockey still hasn't really kicked in. The timing was unbelievable, but it has been something else. And I guess we're all going to have to stay tuned to see what happens, because we still have a season to play out under the old CFL rules. Justin, thank you so much for joining us. The perfect person to speak on this, not only because of your affiliation for, as I said, for the game and the fact that you cover it. I know this means a lot to you. So really appreciate your breakdown and your opinions as well, too. Thank you so much.
You bet, man. I'll just add one thing before
Please
I go.
Do.
Because MLSC had that event with the Bills at BMO Field recently, right? Doug Flutie was there. And he was talking about how the NFL is kind of just getting around to the way that the CFL ran their offenses back in the day when he was in the Canadian Football League. It might not have been called the RPO, but now, even if you're a fair weather football fan, you know what that is because NFL teams are running it. So when he's talking about sort of the NFL evolving off of the CFL game, at least offensively, that means that the CFL is probably not necessarily behind the times. Again, I think you need to evolve, and the pitch clock in Major League Baseball has helped that sport out immensely. But I don't think the issues are with the CFL game. I understand these changes. The Rouge makes sense. The play clock being uniform, I think, makes a lot of sense if they can really dial that in. And then I think having teams on either side makes a lot of sense. But I just wish they would have tested out some of these major changes in 2027, because I'll leave you with this. What if there are actually more punts in 2027 than 26 or 25 or 24 on down the list? Then how's the league going to look?
We'll soon find out, my friend. You can catch them, 3Down Nation, obviously online. Great podcast every week, forecasting games, looking back at the games. You guys are doing a wonderful job, and we appreciate you joining us here, partner.
Thanks, my man. Appreciate the platform.
All right. That's your Sportsline Podcast for the day, folks. And if you've just seen and heard, we love talking sports. We're so passionate about the Canadian Football League. If you do know of an athlete, team, or event to promote, the Sportsline Podcast, we want to hear from you. Please hit that thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. And if you have something to say, always appreciate your comments. For the outstanding people that make the Sportsline Podcast possible, thank you so very much. And we'll see you real soon.